Hey everyone, welcome back to The AMP, your favorite podcast for elevating voices in skills training and empowering change through workforce policies. If this is your first time tuning in, you're in for a good one. If you're a Thanksgiving foodie like me, well, let's describe it as when the mac and cheese and yams touch, if you know what I mean. Anyways, let's talk about something serious that should matter to both you and me. Economic mobility. Skills training and workforce funding leads to good jobs, higher wages, and economic mobility. And UNI's federal advocacy for such policies keeps skills training accessible and for everyone. But even when all of the advocacy pays off and legislation is passed, we might notice that many of America's workers are still getting the short end of the stick when it comes to access to skills training and good paying careers. In the last episode, we talked about NSC's federal agenda and how these policies have real impact on real people, especially in BIPOC communities, that is, Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities with people of color. In a world where experience required is listed on entry-level jobs, breaking into certain industries can feel like an Olympic event for us, without the gold medal at the end, or even the bronze. Jordan Childs, you'll always be a medalist to me, girl. Anyway, just last year, NSC completed polling research and found that 78% of Black voters perceive a lack of access to skills training as a significant challenge facing workers in the current job market. So it's time to get real. I'm closing out this series with two brilliant guests cut from the same cloth, Nakeisha Ricks and Jolie Bernard. So make sure you get comfy because we're going to hone in on Black workers, highlighting their specific challenges while offering solutions grounded in policy and practice. Nakeisha literally wrote the article on it. No, seriously. She wrote an op-ed about it in the Washington Informer, talking about Black workers and the gap that exists for accessing these workforce programs. And Jolie has been working on the ground, helping build industry sector partnerships that actually open doors for Black workers instead of slamming them shut, like some of you do with the Jehovah's Witnesses at your door. So whether you're here because you're a policy nerd, someone trying to make sense of the workforce landscape, or you just accidentally clicked on this podcast and decided to stick around, I invite you to have a chat, relax, kick up your feet. Let's get into it. Don't mind the gap. Episode 3, coming to you right now. Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to the AMP. Today we're tackling a crucial issue, racial workforce disparities and how industry sector partnerships can create pathways to economic opportunity. Our two guests today, we have Nakeisha Ricks-Pettyjohn and Jolie Bernard. They're going to introduce themselves, tell you how they got here, and we'll kick off with some questions for them. Nakeisha, how about you go first?
All right. Hey, thank you, Tianna. I'm Nakeisha Ricks-Pettyjohn. I'm a senior fellow with National Skills Coalition. I'm on our government affairs team. A little bit about how I got here. I come from the state of Tennessee, Department of Labor and Workforce Development, where I was able to serve a lot of our participant-facing programs. I oversaw Title I. I know I'm talking in a lot of acronyms like Title I, Title III, SNAP ENT, but most importantly, I was able to oversee the one-stop operations in the state. How I got into the workforce world is so funny. I kind of just like slipped in it, like fell in it, right? It's not anything that I majored in school. I'm an environmental scientist with a biology degree and a minor in chemistry. So this is like totally outside of it. But one thing I did learn is around social injustice, right? And about protecting community and advocating for so. And so after college, I was in the competitive workforce, right? And so a lot of the things was you had to have the experience to come into these jobs, right? Even though I did everything I was supposed to on my post-secondary, I just needed someone to give me a chance. And the Department of Labor did. They were able to translate my skills, right? Seeing that I had scientific writing experience, I had research experience, I was able to advocate in communities for different causes. They were able to say, well, we can just teach you workforce. We can get you in and teach you the programs. We just got to give you a chance. And one of the biggest things that I'll be transparent about is I had women that look like me around in the agency that seen the potential in me, that stretched me and gave me a chance to shine and prove that I was able to translate skills from post-secondary. And I was a single mom. So I was a parenting student, a little different, coming from hospitality, post-secondary into workforce, but they gave me a shot. And so from there, I transitioned over to NSC and now I'm here. So that's a little spill about me.
Yes, and we've been working together now for about, 4 years?
Not fun when you're having fun, man. We can't say we knew no more. So yeah,
I'm telling you.
can't say it.
Thank you for that introduction. Jolie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having me. I am Jolie Bernard, and I am an entrepreneur based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Much like Nakeisha, my background does not translate workforce development. I have a dual degree in biology and chemistry. So, here I am, though, in 2025, advocating for people that look like me. And so, being able to be invited by Jeff and Jaron to come up to DC since I have already active work in the landscape and in the DMV, as an entrepreneur to do the Blue Fly-In, the Business Leaders United Fly-In, and truly understand what National Skills Coalition is all about. That happened end of 2023. And here I am, and I am a firm believer and a really big proponent and advocate of the work that you all are doing. And I'm just happy to be able to have this conversation with like-minded women, but more importantly, with women who are represented in these spaces that look like me.
Excellent. And for our listeners who may not know, Business Leaders United, as Jolie said, she is a member of our Business Leaders United partnership, or I guess branch arm. We actually did an article with her last year for Women's History Month. So if you guys want to check that out as well, that is on the Blue website, and it's a good read if you have a couple minutes. And I see both of you come from science-y backgrounds and translated your skills, so find a little common things we have here. Okay, let's get into some questions. We'll start with you, Nakeisha. So you recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Informer about Black workers and these different disparities they have and the skills gaps and all of that. What inspired you to address this issue?
Yeah, I will say one of the biggest things for me was in 2024, prior to the election, we did some polling data at NSC, right? And so we partnered with some groups and we just wanted to see what voters were thinking. And what was starking to me was 93% of Black voters said there had to be a closer relationship between businesses and training providers, right? Without using the words industry sector partnership. And then we also seen that 92% of voters said that they were for the need to expand training access, right? And so we were seeing all these investments that were coming down from the Biden administration around these emerging industries. We had clean energy, offshore wind, semiconductor manufacturing, but then also just sitting back and just understanding the track record of this country. It was time to bring us into the game. There has been decades of investments and missed opportunities, specifically around Black people, right? Where we can contribute to an economy. I think I seen it was a stat around if we would have just tackled into those missed opportunities of investing in Black people in a 10-year span, in a decade, we could have contributed more than $1.7 trillion into it. And if we're thinking about the economy and where we sit today, that's very important, right? And so I thought, Joint Center was doing some research and they were asking us to peer review on it around, they were doing a 6-state policy scan around industry sector partnerships, trying to identify trends, but they were also just calling out the disparities and the needs for Black workers. And we had, me and a couple of colleagues had written around creating an equitable and resilient workforce strategies. We had written around UIOA recommendations. And one of those was around investing in sector partnership. And so we were just saying, how can two organizations come together, right, in February and give kind of like a tribute to Black workers, right? Not just calling out the disparities and the challenges, but also coming with some practical solutions. And so it was February, me and Justin from the Joint Center got together and we were like, how can we put 800 words together around just the research we've done to elevate the need for Black workers in this economy? And so that kind of sparked us with just the data, the research, and coming together saying one band, one sound. It was time to bring us in the game, coach. It was time.
One band, one sound, my favorite drumline reference.
Okay.
I love that movie, actually. I really do. Yeah, so we talk about Black workers, and actually the conversation I had in episode 2 with Brooke, she said something really that kind of stuck with me is like once we let down the walls of inclusion, we find that these policies work for everyone. When you're including everyone, other people benefit as well. And then I brought up the fact that, a lot of people, when they get rid of these policies, don't realize that these policies were helping them as well. And I talked about like affirmative action and how that happened. And now everybody's missing out on these college scholarships and college
Yeah.
acceptances. But
Mm-hmm.
hey, you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
And Jolie, you work on the ground with industry sector partnerships. From your experience, how do these partnerships help address racial workforce inequities?
Yeah, so Black workers experience inequitable employment and wage outcomes every single day. And to your earlier point about anti-DEI and the 21st century administration that we're managing at the moment through all of our different arteries and arms of how we actually do programmatic work, right? This is not new, right? You can put an acronym on it, you can wrap it up with a bow, you can say it however you want to say it or not say it. But Black folks have been fighting this fight and managing with nothing for the extent of our existence, right? And so when we talk about the workforce ecosystem as we experience it across industry, which generally relies on those standalone training programs and that funding, these disparities are exacerbated because we're constantly being pushed into low wage opportunities with minimal advancement or just no upward mobility, right? And so when we look at sector partnership programs and how those respond to employers' needs with the training mechanisms to fill those in-demand jobs, we've got to reevaluate really the efficacy of the partnership firstly. And then to move beyond that conceptual idea of exploration, we've got to commit to actually implementing the practices, right? We've got to do the work. We sit in a space where we like to talk about things a lot. And, we have to have the meeting, after the meeting, before the meeting has a side meeting, a backdoor meeting, all of these conversations that are happening around how to create opportunity for people that look like us. We've got to move beyond that and actually just do the work and build that body of work and build that portfolio of work so that we have evidence-based outcomes, qualitative data, quantitative data. I know, Nakeisha, you can appreciate this in your research space, where if we can't prove the performance, then we can't go after the funding. And so we've got to get better at data collection. We've got to get better at actually meaning what we say at a table where we're entering into these MOUs and these CEAs, and we've got to produce the outcomes. And I think when we look at it through that lens, we're helping the folks who are in most need, but it benefits everyone.
Brooke quoted you earlier when you said that stories are data with souls, which is
Absolutely.
absolutely true. And we at NSC, we work on getting these stories all the time, which actually includes the Blue Fly-In we did. I think it maybe was September or October of last year, where we had the employers and their partners come in and go on the Hill and talk to their congressmen and policy workers about these industry sector partnerships. And a lot of the stories were inspiring. And sometimes you don't even know that this stuff is happening behind the scenes. So that's why
Yeah.
they had to bring the data and the evidence, as you were
Yeah.
saying, with them.
And then
But it
putting
was
a
a
face
good,
to it. Putting a face
yeah,
to it, right? Like
that's what
it
I'm
hits
saying.
different. It hits different. Like you can have data talk two different sides of a story, right? And so
Exactly.
when you bring someone in, now that's not a number, that's a person, that's a constituent, that's an
Exactly.
impact, right? And so, yeah, yeah. So I'm all about the storytelling. Gotta let them
Right.
know. Gotta let them know.
Exactly.
Brag on yourself. Brag on yourself a little bit. Yeah.
Like, let us know what you're doing.
Yeah.
How is it helping so that we can go and help other people do the same thing?
I'm a Southern girl, so it go back to my testimony. You know what I'm saying? Like, tell people your testimony. Like, tell them. So, yeah.
So your op-ed highlights the barriers Black workers face in accessing skills training and quality jobs. Can you walk us through some of the biggest challenges that Black workers may face?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things is access, right? I'm just gonna go back to before, Nakeisha, we're just gonna go back to Keisha, right? Keisha going through school trying to navigate this and didn't even know about a lot of these programs and partnerships out in the community, right? So one thing is access to the community, low wages. I think Jolie talked about that earlier, right? So it's the low wages, the underemployment, the working piece, the quality of work are some of the challenges, right? We're already currently working, and then we're trying to have a better opportunity, right? It's just the quality of work and the environment and the cultures of those things. And then training investments with earn and learn models, right? That's the biggest thing. We have to put our money where our mouth is. I think, sis just talked about it earlier. We're doing a lot of talking. We have to put the investments into those talking points, right? And one of those is I shouldn't have to choose between education and work. There should be some type of model where I can do both, earn and learn. So it's not an or, it's an I should be able to do both. And we see that is very successful for Black workers, right? When they have apprenticeship opportunities, equitable apprenticeship opportunities, because we can go down a rabbit hole around apprenticeships too, right? But most importantly to me, one of the challenges, which is part of the solution, is the lack thereof community voice. How are we designing and implementing policies and programs without asking people what they need? It's because we've read, I can even just say this from my publication and my research, right? By the time we receive things at a DC and a national level, that was yesterday's news, right? That was yesterday's problem. Things are forever changing. And the only way you can stay ahead of the game and be, instead of being reactive, become proactive is bringing the community to the table. The people that are closely connected to the challenge have the solutions. They just need to be heard. Here we are creating programs and designing things without asking somebody, what do you need and what do you aspire to be? Right? How can I build something? So here it is. We didn't build, I use this analogy all the time. We didn't build a two-door car and I needed a four because I had car seats. But you didn't even ask me. You just came rolling in. Now you're going to make me fit into this model. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges. You're going to hear me talk about workers' voice and community voices. I know it takes a lot of work to engage workers and communities, but there's organizations that's doing it. They're doing it at the kindness of their heart. They're doing it with scrap budgets. So I feel like that's an opportunity to, again, invest into the CBOs who are currently doing it. And then just using that. They're the trusted arms in the community. Right. And I think about government, like I was government too. Sometimes we're not best suited to come into the community because the lack of trust in what we've done, right? And what we haven't done for Black people. So sometimes you have to invest into the trust, the partnership, and not just constantly having CBOs because they're Black led and ran and with a focus of Black folk. You want them to be a checkbox at the door. Like, no, put your money where my check mark is, And so I think that's some of the biggest challenges. I'm just going to go back to it. The lack thereof investments and the lack thereof the voice. Sorry.
And Jolie, from your work in workforce development, how do these disparities show up in hiring, training, career advancements, and leveling up and things like that?
So I'm going to act as an echo chamber to what Nakeisha just said because she hit it right on the mark, nailed it. The target was boom, right in the middle. Through limited access to education and training, discriminatory practices, lack of or limited access to childcare and transportation, lack of a navigator or a mentor, lack of limited access to flexible work arrangements, financial constraints, ... the ellipsis, right? We can keep going. For our community and the people in it, we have got to be able to show up in the ways that we know that we can, but we've got to address the barriers to entry first, right? Like we are unique. We're not a monolith, one. And I know that's a cliche-ish thing to say, but everybody's situation isn't the same. And so when you've got an employee arrangement where it's very rigid and linear and there's no flexibility in that, it's not that I don't want to come to work. It's not that I can't come to work and perform, but the things that are around me environmentally and geographically, that are happening to me are part of the reason why I'm having these challenges in just showing up. And so if I have no flexibility from my employer, because I have a family, because I'm carrying multiple jobs, because I'm trying to go to school in the process of an 8 to 12 hour day, because we're not even maxing out the 24 hours here. You have about a good 8 to 12 hours in a traditional working environment to show up and do something. And so if there's no flexibility in that, what am I supposed to do? And we can't have the conversation around creating the condition for me to show up as my best self because for whatever reason, my employer, my counterpart, my supervisor, this person doesn't believe that it's viable and productive, leaves me with what choice, right? And so, I think all of that to say that when we really look at barriers to entry and how that affects our unique circumstances most oftentimes, that's where we have to start. And then all of what my good sis Nakeisha said, like all of those things wrapped up with the bow and presented as the challenge needs to be solutions driven and action oriented around how that outcome is going to change my trajectory and change my life.
Exactly. That's a great answer. And your work focuses on industry sector partnerships in particular. Can you explain kind of what these partnerships look like and how they're effective in closing equity gaps?
Yeah, so I think before we even get into that, we really have to reconcile that the legacy of racism, right, is too historically deep to think we can ever move past it without unpacking the everyday racial equity and social issues that really affect us all. And, because we have this social tendency to want to act and move on because the realities of our conditions around racism are so unpleasant and uncomfortable for a lot of people, I truly believe that effective industry sector partnership will align with the fundamental understanding of how we arrived at the need for the collaboration in the first place. Like, we have to acknowledge that first. And then we have to determine why we need to amplify the work of the partnership and anchor those outcomes, right? Because every decision that we're making in this space affects a real individual and their families. And this is not just performative. It's not just predicative. It's just not all of these things that, we want a high level think through as a desktop exercise. Like, this is affecting real people every single day. And so I think more than talking about the participative practices, we need to facilitate these programs that truly address with metrics, Nakeisha, those equity gaps and engage the stakeholder groups that we can hold accountable for shifting the trajectory of those most in need. And, it sounds like we're on a soapbox and it sounds like we're just beating the horse into oblivion a lot of times, but we have to continue to reiterate, reaffirm, and re-educate folks who just assign racial equity and social injustice and all of the words that affect the inclusivity for everybody. We have to educate around what that even really means, because a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it sometimes feels like we're starting from ground zero because a lot of the times people try to act like these things don't exist. Like, oh, no one's doing you any harm. You should be able to bootstrap it. And maybe if you worked a little bit harder, and it's like, we're all working hard. And some of us do have to work harder than others to get to where others are or would be if but I'm sure your all parents used to say the same thing. We have to work twice as hard, sometimes even more, just to get to where other folks might be.
And if I
And
could just
Jolie,
interject really quickly to your point,
yeah,
we're talking about a social construct though, right? Like, when folks are saying we need to go and bootstrap it and get it out the mud and all those things, I don't want my children getting anything out of the mud. Okay. Like, I want to be able
exactly.
to provide the runway for them to be able to seamlessly live an exceptional life, right? And
Right.
know that their mom and their dad created those conditions so they don't have to work as hard for twice as much. Like, that bothers me to my core. Like, it interrupts my spirit and disrupts my soul when people say, get it out the mud. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
I'm not a fan of that
Why?
term either.
I think Damon Wayans just said that on a podcast with Cliff Shay. Like, he was talking about, the Wayans and the empire that they built, and so now they got another generation coming through. And his biggest thing was, why do y'all keep taking detours when we cleared the path? Right. And so that's what we all want to provide. That's the whole point of our previous ancestors getting it out, quote unquote, the mud. Right. So we can have access and we can just thrive. Like, why do I constantly have to be in this state of survival to be, equated to a quality of life? Like, you aligning those together. Like, I have no value unless I have a struggle. Like, but
Exactly.
why? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the whole point of breaking the generational curse and learning from our mishaps, that you don't want people to continue to get it out the mud.
Yeah,
Why?
and it's
Right?
also like, why do we have to prove to people that we deserve just basic human rights, basic things
And that's
that
a human
everybody
right
else
to
gets, that
provide.
we always have to fight for and scrounge up? And
Yes.
then, you get people in our community that are fighting against each other because we feel like there's no room at the top for everybody. Because,
Hmm.
I mean, historically, that's how it's been perceived to us, at least in this community.
I'm with you around just the human decency. I talk about that with workers and quality jobs and
Exactly.
wages. Why do they have to fight to be able to provide for their family? That's a human right. And it really gets sticky when we talk about individuals that are leaving incarceration, right? Serve their time. They should
Absolutely.
have the human right to provide for their family in a quality, good paying job. Like, usually that's the root of a lot of issues, is the lack thereof a good quality, good wage job. Once you give that, you get good insurance. You see how things, mental health and substance abuse issues become less than. I'm not smoking it, like when we think about even tobacco consumption, like, you know what I'm saying? All those things are linked to a lot of workplace things. So once we give
Yeah,
people access to those and they don't have to fight, right? For it or prove the extreme proving of worthiness for it, we start seeing a return on investment, a contribution to the economy. Like,
exactly.
it's not, that's a social construct, but then we think about the ROI from a business standpoint. Doing this
Exactly.
makes good business sense. It just does. So sorry.
Yeah, and like the folks say where we from, Nakeisha, that's too much like right though. Like
This
this the common
that's
sense
it.
thing, the sensical thing to do
Yeah.
is usually the last thing that's ever considered.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know better, you do better. But sometimes that's too much act right.
Hmm.
It's too much act right in people.
So, Jolie, we talked about your work and industry sector partnerships, and you mentioned that the research for these partnerships, it kind of has to go hand in hand. So, Nakeisha, my question for you is, from your research, how do these industry sector partnerships compare to like traditional job training programs in addressing racial disparities?
Yeah. So when we think about I think we mentioned that in our op-ed around industry sector partnership and how they were initially connected to the civil rights movement focus in Detroit, right? Moving those workers into a manufacturing industry, right? And so knowing that it has a connection to the civil rights movement should let us know that it was a solution to address a disparity for a community, right? And so when we compare it to the traditional job training program, I'm not trying to put one against the other because I feel like they both. I want to talk about industry sector partnerships like an organization, right? So sometimes we think about industry sector partnerships, the activities that come through them, the training program, the supportive services, the access, the employer training and learning opportunities, and we forget about the governance. When you have a good business model, you have something that's called governance and operations. So you have your mid-level and your entry-level workers performing the activities to fulfill the objective and the goals of the operations. So we need to talk about industry sector partnership like business, right? What it is, the partners that are there. That's why that business voice is there, right? So we can think about the governance and the operation of industry sector partnership. It takes time and commitment to convene partners, to translate skills from employers to workers to training providers, right? If I'm running a company, I'm wearing, especially a small business, which we know small businesses are usually the entryway for Black workers, especially those that are returning from incarcerations. Mom and pops are going to give you a shot, right? So when we think about that, I'm HR, I'm social media manager, and I'm CEO. I can't do it all. So that's why we have to think about industry sector partnerships and the investments at the top, the convening powers, the intermediary in the governance to make sure that everybody's flying right. Right? Because at the end of the day, I'm still thinking about my bottom line as a business, productivity. I'm trying to stay afloat. And even though I would love to be in all these meetings, I would love to be at all these events, I have to have a trusted source who can translate the information to me and show me how I need to show up. That's it, right? And when we think about industry sector partnerships, I want to say, I don't want to put it against a training program because a training program is the activity that comes out of it. Right? They should be blended together. They should be, an industry sector partnership is the convening governance body to make sure that we're meeting the economy goals, right? If we're seeing an industry is losing, like pandemic was a good example. We've seen hospitality go down, but we've seen a need for retail. So how do we translate these skills to get these people so they're not on the unemployment line? They can translate over here to the management. They can translate over to these higher level positions. How do we get Nashville in particular? How do we get our artists who were not able to perform, right, in music? How do we get them into a sector where education, where we needed more bodies in the school to mitigate and monitor and give them a different experience to a sector without having them go through a whole training program, right, and get certified to be a teacher, which that wasn't my goal, but I'm here to contribute to my community and earn wages at the same time instead of sitting on the sideline. So I just want to say there isn't one or the other. I think industry sector partnerships has a holistic view of everything instead of being so in the niche of you're going to work at Bridgestone or you're going to work at John Deere. No, we can look at the industry of manufacturing. And even if this doesn't have the movement that you need, mobility, in a sector partnership, I can see where that can translate into a different employer, a different sector with more wages, more opportunities, more use. And so creates an environment where even businesses are not competing anymore, right? They're creating pathways of mobility of indirect workers. Knowing that I'm a mom and pop shop, I'm going to tap out at a certain level. But I've created a partnership where you can go over here to Bridgestone. Now you're running a whole line by yourself instead of just three. So I hope that's making sense of what I'm trying to say.
It
Is
is
not
making
competing
sense.
against each other, but embedding them into each other with intentionality, though. Right? It has to be
Yes.
with intention.
That's a good way to explain that, especially for people who are not in the policy world. Like just using examples of specific industries. You mentioned hospitality and nursing, manufacturing. So for the both of you, either one of you can answer this question. Jolie, you can chime in as well. Are there specific industries where these partnerships are making the most impact?
Yeah, so I'll give you my response through my current lived experience, right? And I want to sit with the sensitivity around something that Nakeisha said that's very important work, but very personal to me. So when we talk about, without getting into the weeds and going down the rabbit hole on this, tackling recidivism, right? And second chances for directly impacted and formerly incarcerated men and women across the country. I feel like because I am working very directly with a company out of West Texas called ADC&T, which is in the transportation and logistics industry space for oil and gas as the sector, right? The CEO there is formerly incarcerated. Aubrey Decker did his time, came out, wanted to be a productive citizen, a contributing citizen, right? And just the roadblocks that are designed around how to re-enter into society, but more importantly, the workforce, are not designed for our people, the people that look like, I'm being very specific, Black men and women, to go back and do things to not reoffend, not easy. And so what Aubrey did was he created an ecosystem through this transportation company that operates out of West Texas to be able to hire formerly incarcerated and directly impacted men and women. And that's not his entire workforce, right? But I have a friend here and a colleague and a mentor out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana named Terry Simmons, who says it all the time. You have got to groom the workforce to grow the workforce. And if nobody's giving anybody an opportunity, but particularly folks that are coming out of a system that's not designed for them to be productive and contribute to their livelihood and not reoffend, we've got a whole fundamental issue that we have to tackle. And so, through this work that we're doing out in West Texas, we are seeing that formerly incarcerated and directly impacted individuals, because of the CEO's experience, are having opportunities to be gainfully employed and to take care of themselves and their families and not even have to think about the reoffense, because basic necessities are being met and the threshold is being exceeded for what a livable wage looks like. And so, shout out to Aubrey Deckard and Marlene and Eric Johnson, who are former veterans who are in that space, former Black veterans who are creating opportunities for people that look like us across the country to come to middle of West Texas, right? And really just put in the work to not have to think about the alternative to not being gainfully employed.
And I just want to go ahead and get on it because it is April, so it's reentry month, second chance month, shout out to that. So it's a good conversation for that. But when we think about industry sector partnerships, I talk about a lot about investing in the worker, right? We definitely got to invest in the worker. I talked about investing in the governance, right? Your intermediary and your organizations that's helping these partners come to the table and translate these skills. But also, I think there has to be an investment in the capital. I'm going to talk about Black businesses to be able to reach out. What he's doing in Texas is all because of his lived experience, and he knows the disparities of coming back from incarcerated. I got to go to work because I got to report to my PO, but I don't even have no driver's license, no birth certificate to show nobody for my I-9. You see what I'm saying? There's a gap in itself. Like, how can I go to work and pay him? And they're always going to choose their PO over work. So how do I find a job that's going to let me go? Because I don't want to go back, right? And then while I'm incarcerated, how do I get the resources that help me transition out? So we've seen that in some places like in Alabama where, I can speak from just my personal experience. I've seen somebody come out with like 43 certifications, right? And, in a rehabilitation program around being certified in growing industries. So when he was able to come out and one job, was too far, he didn't have transportation, he was able to pivot real quick because he had the certifications, right? But also the employers already knew the importance of hiring hiring individuals when they're coming back from incarceration. So I want to talk about the capital investment, and that's a need there too. And it doesn't have to come from the WIOA system, right? Because which we do invest in employers through OJTs and we do through RAs, you know what I'm saying, the training and the instructional part. But we have to think about these businesses and how they can reach out, right? And how can we move employers to having these good job principles that we talk about in government a lot from commerce, and we've seen that with the Good Jobs Challenge and the Act and all that. How do we build employers to be those great employers? We have to invest in them. We have to invest in them and give them the resources to leverage and reach out and then show the system how to work, right? So I just want to go into that. Shout out to him in Texas for reaching beyond.
Yeah, and that actually kind of lands with me as well. I'm going to share like a little personal anecdote. Nakeisha, you probably already know this. I shared this. My brother is currently incarcerated right now, my younger brother. And where he's incarcerated, they have different programs. So he participated in one that was like a carpenter construction kind of program. That way he would have something when he got out so that he could make a smooth transition into the real world. I mean, he's been in almost a decade, so a lot has changed. But like you said, Nakeisha, like having these things set up while these folks are incarcerated can help make that transition easier, as well as, there are some folks who might want to get out and get their education and take some certifications at community colleges, etc. So let's talk about some of these certifications that people can get at community colleges and the funds that are available for that. So Nakeisha, in your op-ed, you mentioned the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. WIOA for short, for our listeners who may not know that. What updates do you think are necessary to ensure it better serves Black workers?
Yeah, so off the pandemic at NSC, we convened, I think, over 140 different organizations and workers. During that time, we had American Rescue dollars down on the ground. We were just trying to see what was working in the system, what wasn't working. And now that you have these flexible funding, right, what can you do? And we know that WIOA can be complex, right? It can be complex and expensive, especially if you don't know how to stretch beyond some of those gray areas. I can say I was in a system where it was supported. Innovation was encouraged and supported, right? So a lot of things that I was able to do with WIOA dollars, I now help and coach other people through, like through the CFR, which is the legal legislation language. You know what I'm saying? Like how to support your innovation using the current system. I will say that over decades, the WIOA has declined in funding and investments. You can't ask the public workforce system to do better when you're not investing in it to do better, right? They're getting strapped. It's getting stretched. But I also want to say that when we think about workforce and we think about that ecosystem, WIOA is a piece of the pie. It should not be all of it, right? We shouldn't be so codependent. It is one piece that is intended to be blended and braided, like in the communities, right? And so we have other legislations that can come through, like Bills Act, when we're talking about grants that's going around to industry sector partnerships, like, right, getting and supporting those. We talked about in our WIOA recommendations around there has to be dedicated funding to industry and sector partnership. Now, WIOA has codified it, meaning that it's established that this is a strategy that should be going out into our communities, but there is no dedicated funding to do it. So you got to invest, and you also have to measure what you need to change. Right? Like when you start putting metrics on things start to work and move. Think about your performance at work, right? Once you start watching it and start doing a little different, right? So like we have to be intentional about what we're measuring. But one of the biggest recommendations that we have beyond just creating a 21st century industry sector partnership network with investments and grants that are going into building these models at different levels, right? Because you have different states and different communities at different phases of building these ecosystems in their community. But the biggest thing was we put in, I think, around WIOA that has to be changed and challenged is the investment to the communities. We have to start bringing in CBOs that represent the communities and have experience in serving the communities into the workforce system, right? It's easy to currently, like the way the system is set up, it's easy to continue to fund the same thing over and over and over and over. But you have grassroots organizations that need the investments, because whether you invest in them or not, they still gonna make sure these people are right. So my thing is bring them into not only just the planning of it with a checkbox, but giving them direct dollars to serve these individuals, right? In these industry sector partnerships. They can be just a CBO who's helping them navigate some of those triage we talked about. Like, right before you get to work, first I got to figure out where my kid is gonna be at. I got my ceiling leaking. You know what I'm saying? I might can't afford where I stay, or I'm looking for someone to stay because I'm in a hotel, which is by definition experiencing homelessness, right? So
Yeah.
I can't think about showing up at a job when I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna get these dollars to make sure my family can eat tonight, right? So those CBOs that look like the community that's impacted are intended to serve those, and that's the triage piece. So when we think about workforce, we just think about somebody coming and sitting in a classroom and then going to work. But there are steps prior to, and that's when you got to wrap your hands and invest in the CBOs and the small grassroots organizations that are figuring out the solutions to meet the needs, and then they bring them in. So I would say that's the investment pieces when we think about WIOA, putting the dollars into those hands that are serving the impacted. We don't need nobody, no middleman. Give it to them. Give it to them.
Yeah, and that's a good point because, as you said, there are a lot of steps before you even think about going to work, before you even think about it, doing it over and over again the next day, the next day. Like for some people, it's where are my kids going to be? Can I afford childcare? How am I going to get there? Like there's
Yeah.
so many different things that people are dealing with that it's like going to work and doing the job is not always the issue.
Yes, yes. I want to just shout out Commissioner Denise Snowman. She'll be at our summit in May in Tennessee. She used to always say, like, we have to step back sometimes. And we're so quickly to say, you know, people are just trying to make it day by day. This is a different time. People are trying to make it second by second.
Absolutely.
We didn't give day. That's too much time.
Yes.
I can't think about tomorrow when I'm trying to think about how we gonna eat in the next 10 minutes, or
Yes,
how we
ma'am.
gonna
Right.
get to that next doctor's appointment, right? So I think that's just shout out, like when we triaging people, we're just thinking about the end, the glorified pieces of our work. We got them into the GED class, but what did we have to do? How do we triage this person? And we have better outcomes when we do that, because now you didn't remove that, my immediate needs. Now I can focus in this classroom because I'm not worried about so much, right? So yeah, yeah.
And
Sorry.
Jolie, we talked about, allocating different funding and putting it directly into the communities. So if WIOA were to allocate more funding for industry sector partnerships, how do you think that would change the workforce landscape for communities of color?
So I believe WIOA is directly correlated and connected to economic mobility and quality of life. So additional funding allocations ensure that communities of color, our communities, have better access to take advantage of training, hiring, and those advancement opportunities. Because when we look at things that are associated with line items of these funding mechanisms, right, we're looking at Pell Grants. We're looking at 2-year institutional spaces that are providing technical training and stipends and all of the things that, for the most part, our communities and the people in it are the ones that benefit the most, right? And so WIOA dollars can help facilitate long-term change by prioritizing inclusivity for those most in need, but benefiting all of the community aspects, right? And so having access to those initiatives specifically designed to support education and training, to actually be able to compete for those high demand industry jobs, ensure that these workers and professionals have access to well-paying jobs and mobility both within career and in community. And when we think about like what that looks like in real time and how those things are actually happening on the ground and the folks that are responsible for doing that, I can't think of a more well-positioned and postured example here in Louisiana and New Orleans than my good friend Sarita Stibe and Montrell Carmouche, who are working within an organizational space that Sarita's created called Operation Restoration. And Operation Restoration here in New Orleans directly attacks the fundamental disparities, right, for formerly incarcerated and directly impacted women and their families. And so when we talk about what Sarita has created because of her lived experience, we've got a bail fund going on that Montrell, facilitates the work around that every day. So you can call Operation Restoration and say, listen, I got an issue and I need a little bit of help getting about the situation so I can not reoffend. And then,
Right.
Sarita is responsible for an industry sector, and it's very unique in its focus, right? But it's called STEM Ops, right? And STEM Ops is a partnership, a national partnership that actually creates a pipeline program within the prison system to be educated and to be certified so that when you come out of that system, you already actually have the skills and the transferable skills, the education and the credentials to go and get a job that will provide you with the living wage right out of, the transitional space. So you're not trying to figure out, do I pay my PO? Do I have the money for parole? Can I go get a nice dress or a suit? Do I have gas for the car? Can I get there on time? Like, do I have to show up back at the halfway house in 5 minutes? Or, do I have flexibility to actually go and show up as my true self and try to get this job and create this opportunity for myself and my family? And so when we look at those types of programs and the people that are operating in those spaces, we've got to attach the lived experience to it. If it directly affects me and mine, I'm going to figure out within that allotment of time in the day how to make this pop, how to make this work so we're not dealing with this tomorrow, right? And so we're looking at short-term, long-term solutions. And I think the WIOA dollars definitely support the ability to facilitate that work.
But we can always have some more.
Of
Okay.
For
course.
sure.
Come on.
There's,
And
I
not
mean,
just with
can
WIOA,
never have too
with
much.
all of these federal funding
Yep.
mechanisms,
Mm-hmm.
state regional funding mechanisms that actually promote community inclusivity. Like by definition, we need to rearrange how people interpret what inclusivity really even means. Because
Yes.
we've assigned that with a specific demographic of people when by definition, that's just another way to say, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With 3 letters,
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. And a lot of the examples that you guys have given just with these industry sector partnerships and addressing racial workforce inequities, they have been from people who have those lived experiences, like you said. And it seems like a lot of the time, these employers, because they don't have those lived experiences, we often find them kind of thinking that it's not their problem or it doesn't affect them. So, Nakeisha, in your research that you did when writing this op-ed, how much responsibility did you find that employers have in addressing racial workforce inequities?
I would say they have a large, responsibility in addressing it, right? They oversee some of the hiring practices, right? The access to, even just when we think about simply applying to the job, right? In the outreach, in the recruitment mechanisms, like where are they recruiting to? But I also wanted to say that, business leaders should be committed to recruiting, retaining, and hiring diverse talent and committed to partnering with others that can help convene and implement like these activities, right? But also community advocates play a role in holding employers accountable. And we do that through CBAs, community benefit agreements, things of that nature. Like before an employer comes and props up, right? How are we ensuring that our community is going to be served with intention of this employer, right? And I'm not saying around just like, oh, okay, we're going to build this. In Nashville in particular, there was an employer that was coming and they wanted to, land here. And they were like, we're going to hire this many people. We're going to bring this. And but then a lot of Black organizations, shout out to Equity Alliance, was digging into the numbers and digging into the agreement and saying, well, hold up. You coming into these predominantly Black zip codes. How are you going to give these zip codes access to these jobs that you're saying that are paying up to $100,000, in some cases $200,000? How are they getting access to the training so they can be qualified to meet the criteria to come in? You just can't come and set up. And so the employer had to rethink about their model, rethink about their launch and how they were going to set up shop in that community. So I say employers, but sometimes employers have a one-track mind. They are really thinking about that bottom line. And there's no fault to them, right? They have stakeholders and investments. They're trying to do a lot. But then you have examples where you have employers out, a developer in California where he was saying, and sometimes just being transparent about it. He was saying, I made this agreement, but I don't even know where to start. And so he talked to a community college and the community college said, well, what was the agreement? He had to contribute something to the community that was impactful, right? And so the community college came together and said, well, you know what? A lot of your workers are coming from our training programs here. So how about we build childcare on campus with your development dollars? And guess what? He wrote the check out. Okay, you figured it out. He's made it. He can go back to developing and building this business and his bottom line. But he he put the dollars with the people that had the expertise and the trust in the community. They knew exactly what the workers needed. He didn't know. He's running a business, right? And so I think employers share a role in that, but also community advocates like ourselves. Like, we're the experience and the experts. Sometimes we have to step people through it and hold hands. That's what we call a hand holding. And that's all right, because we're going to step through it, but we're going to make sure it's done right. Because if we do it right the first time, it might take a little longer to do it right, but it's right. We don't have to keep coming back and putting bandages on a busted pipe. Like, right?
Yeah.
Like, we could just set it
Absolutely.
up with intention in the beginning, and then everybody can have their share of roles, and then we can have accountability that everybody can see, and it can be transparent.
I feel like that's why people get so mad about gentrification, because, these companies or these real estate developers, they come in, they tear everything down, and then it's like, well, what happened to all the Black people that were here? Like, I mean, just one example is Southeast DC. Like, Southeast, to me, Southeast is always going to be Southeast. I mean,
Yeah.
they put different parts of it, like Navy Yard, and of course, you've got the National Stadium there, who
Mm-hmm.
for a while, the Nationals weren't even a team when I was growing up here in the DMV area, which is why I'm a Yankees fan. But it's just things like that. Like, you have all these apartment complexes going up, and then they're kicking all these Black people out of these spaces
Mm-hmm.
where, originally they had an agreement like, hey, this is what we're going to do, and this is how you guys can continue to work and get your money and still have somewhere to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good point in, like, having the community, I guess, spokesperson
Mm-hmm.
to, go to these employers and say, hey, this is what we need, by the way. Because a
Yeah.
lot of the times, like you said, they're so one-track minded, they have no idea. They just
Yeah.
put up what they were going to put up, and
And they're trying
everyone
to
kind
get
of
to the
scatters.
next phase of the work, right? So easy
Exactly.
opt-out is we couldn't find the workers that had the skills in the community. So we had to, use staffing companies to bring people in, or we're relocating staff, into the community, right? And then hence you start having developing the new apartments, houses. You see what I'm
Exactly.
saying? You see where we're going with this? But you got to have somebody to say, hold them accountable and say, before you even land site, what skills did they need? So we can get the training providers to build the pipeline. It's too late when the building up. The building's up, but it took time to get the building up. So, okay, how do we train people to be part of the construction site, infrastructure? Then we understand that that's going to go on for this long, for 6 months. Okay, so now we should be having people in a customized training program that's going to funnel in your pipeline. And then we can partner with our K-12 to make sure you got a future pipeline. If it's good jobs
Right.
and quality jobs, we're reaching back. So now, you ever walk with
Exactly.
some old guy, like, I'm from a rural part of Alabama, and be like, I built that right there. You know, People take honor into that and
They
pride
do.
to be like, my granddaddy worked there. My granddaddy worked there for decades. My granddaddy helped build that sewer system. You know what I'm saying? Like, he got his initials in the concrete over there. That takes pride, but that also was done with intentionality. That's why you gotta have people. Employees are in communities. I mean, that's your biggest recruiting arm right there. If I got a good job, I'm gonna tell everybody about it. Now, if I don't, I'm gonna tell everybody about it too.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a good point. My uncle Norman actually, he helped build the new Dallas Cowboys Stadium that's in Arlington, Texas. And he took a lot of pride in that while he was still alive. May he rest in peace. But I mean, it was all he would talk about.
Every time a
So
game
I've,
come on, I know he told you. I know he told
yes,
you. I know
yes.
he
And
told
he
you.
wasn't even a Cowboys fan. So I don't know. But
He
he
knew
was a
he
fan
knew
of that
Dion
stadium.
personally because he built that stadium. I know he did.
Right. Now somebody's our cousin. And I'm like, all right, that
See
doesn't
what I'm
sound
saying?
right.
Yeah.
Yes. So there are some companies and sectors that do this well and integrate these people into their business plans and things like that. So Jolie, you've given us some examples with a couple of your friends. What was it? Operation
Restoration. Yeah.
Restoration? Yeah. Are there other companies or sectors that are doing this well? And what is it that we can kind of take away from them?
Yeah, so much to Nakeisha's point, it's all about intentionality, right? Like, we have to do things very deliberately. So when we talk about connectivity and engagement in industry specific sectors, we have to look at what's happening deliberately for and around those employers, right? And what I mean by that is we have to look at the support mechanisms and wraparound services that are that are available to an employee to even extend to its employees, right? The employer has to extend these things to the employees. And so I believe all of that can happen in a sustainable and accountable way through much to Nakeisha's point earlier, the CBOs are community-based organizations, but additionally, economic development organizations across our country, right? And when we talk about, particularly here in my area and landscape, who is doing it well and right, I would say the Gulf South is really making it happen in a very regional way. But more importantly, my colleagues at St. Tammany Economic Development Corporation that service the North Shore, which is, outside of New Orleans proper, under the leadership of Chris Massengale, they're doing the work and creating tangible results in real time. And, the organization has created a unique partnership called the Workforce Roundtable that brings together institutional partners from the K-12 system alongside the 2-year, 4-year institutions that are directly supporting employers and troubleshooting workforce needs and gaps in real time on the spot. And it's benefiting students and by extension community. And so when you have this type of collaborative work and governance, creating pathways and programs, right, to position and retain talent and to support employees and their families, that's what I would say is a measure win and what that looks, feels, and sounds like in my landscape. But more importantly, to Nakeisha's point earlier, we've got to have this governance piece, right? Everybody has to be bought into how to support landscape and community, right? What benefits one could potentially benefit all if it's done the right way and it's strategic. And we are, we have a thing where we're always hurrying up, but sometimes we've got to hurry up to slow down, right? You do things right the first time, and then it becomes a maintenance thing. And how you do anything is how you do everything. So the approach is right. The mindset is what's going to create tangibility, sustainability, solvency for all of the folks that are managing bottom lines through business mechanisms and infrastructures, and just really building that quality of life and that community aspect of what it looks like to thrive beyond the surviving. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about, people putting their money where their mouth is and not making these passive commitments and kind of really getting more involved. So for the both of you, how do we shift employer mindsets from passive commitments to active workforce solutions?
For me, I will say one thing I learned when I was at Department of Labor in Tennessee, we had a new commissioner that came from private sector. He was business focused, right? Then we got a new governor. Governor Lee was appointed at that time, coming directly from private. And one of the things I learned and I took away from that is to change mindsets. It depends on who you're talking to in the audience. When I'm talking to my practitioners, I lead with the social construct. We know it's the right thing to do. We know, right? Because we already have our moral, not that anyone else doesn't have their moral compass pointed that way. But what I'm saying is I don't have to go into the weeds of why. I can skip that and just go directly into that. Now, when I'm coming into someone who's thinking about it from a profit standpoint, you have to show the ROI on your investments. I can't ask legislators in Congress, especially when we think about our elected officials right now. They were employers, many, not employees, right? So when you're talking to someone, you have to think about where they come from. We all talk in this whole podcast, we talked about so much about lived experiences. Sometimes we have to step back and think about our audience who we're talking to and pitching to. And what is their lived experience? I can't expect someone who's never, quote unquote, got it out the mud to understand the resources that I need to get it. But I can make a case around if you invest every dollar, you're going to have a return of this. That's what they're looking at. Or I can promise you, if you build this community and wrap your arms around this community is going to take care of you as an employer. Right? You're not gonna have to worry about where your next talent pipeline gonna come from because it's gonna go in, right? So we see places like, Jack Daniels, and I want to say Uncle Nearest, that family, that family, it hasn't been a bottle made without Nearest descendants on site. That means because the family came, they found out it was a good employer. So now everybody worked there, the uncles, the nephews. You see, if you wrap your arms around the community, it will bring your return on investment. You just got to wrap your arms around it. So to change a mindset is to first understand where someone is coming from, their lived experiences. I can't talk to an employer about social constructs. Some employers you can. We can just go straight to the social aspect of it. But in this day and time, people are really thinking about investments, right? Dollars are getting strained and stretched, right? Tariffs are coming on these businesses. We're going to have to come with a little bit something else. because they think that's what nonprofits do. That's why I write out the charitable checks. That's why we rent the table and we sponsor these, right? This is what you should be doing. No. Let me show you how you can wrap your arms around your employees by having different type of benefit types, right? Instead of investing, it could be simply like when we talk about the benefit cliff, we had employers that was like, I'm offering all my employees $2 more and nobody don't want to take it. And I said, well, hold on now. Did you ask them if they needed the $2? Or did they need a different benefit? Because now if they take the $2, they losing $1,200 in benefits, but you're not giving them nothing else in return for that. And it was an easy shift of giving them more medical benefits that actually cost you better and everybody happy. Giving people what they want, but you got to do that by talking to them and asking what they want. So the change of mindset is understanding it, coming from where they're, and being able to translate the information to your audience. ROI on employers right now. They need to know the return on investment. If you want me to do this, how's it going to help my bottom line and how is it going to keep my investors off my back?
And Jolie, how has this worked for you in your field?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of public-private partnerships work, but again, you have to bring all of the stakeholders to the table or representatives for all of the community, right? And so again, I say it all the time because I'm in the communications profession. I own a strategic communications and branding firm. And every day, I remind folks, communication is the cornerstone by which we live. There will never be a world without it. And so we have got to have these conversations to better understand, what do people need? To Nakeisha's point, don't give me what I'm not asking you for, because you're not going to get nothing out of me. There is no productivity in not having the conversation around what I actually need. And don't assume and don't guess and don't decide for me, because that's going to create secondary and ancillary issues. And so I think, it's just being more conversational and being more communicative about the realities that people are facing right now with all of the things that they directly can't control. And, not to go down the rabbit hole about why we're in the position we're in as a country, but, everybody's voice matters. And when people really reconcile how that affects their everyday operating systems and what they can and can't do for their families, I think we'll be in a much better position. But it all starts with education and communication.
Absolutely. And my last question for you guys before we wrap up is, if you're someone who's not in the policy world, you have no idea where to start, you think no one's listening to you, what is one action that listeners can take today to support industry sector partnerships or workforce equity efforts?
I'll say, again, going back to stories or data points with soul, right? If we want this system to change, we have a lot of micro systems that are working very effectively. How do we make that come to a macro level, right? And so if you've never been in this space and this podcast strikes interest, I say share your stories with us on NSC's website, right? We're gathering storytelling. Join our email notification, and if you got time as a practitioner, come to our summit in DC in May. Right, we're gonna have an advocacy on the Hill day on the 7th, where we're having states talk to their elected officials in Congress around these issues, around sharing these stories and coming with solutions. And I really just want us to think about, like, when we think about it collectively, I heard a quote and I'm always going to stick to it. Poor people get programs, rich people get policies. We cannot continue to just keep funding another program because we see what happens, right? We're seeing this happening in real time, polishing of programs, right? And so then we're starting off at ground zero. Tianna, I think you mentioned that right at the beginning of the podcast. I feel like we always starting out at ground zero. How do we create practice to policy? How do we bring programs, like, right, practice should be programs should be feeding policy. So tell us your stories and then come with a policy solution. Programs are great. Programs are great, but we can leverage the programs to create the sustainability and codify the intentionality around, because it depends on who's reading it that day and how they interpret the law and who gets it and who gets access. But if we explicit with the programs that they have issued and showed us these outcomes, now we need policy to codify. So when the funding and the program, the youth program, the pilot and demonstration program comes to an end, I have at least a policy to sustain the behaviors of and who, right? And then we can think about a different banking account for the investment. But the practice and the behaviors have been established through policy. So that's one thing I say. Come with us to the summit, sign up for our emails, and tell your stories.
Yeah, we do have ways that we collect stories, take action, all that other good stuff. Can send us stories on social media. I don't know how many characters they'll let you type in there. So if it's a long story, you might just want to shoot us an email. And Jolie, from your perspective, what's an action that you think might help support industry sector partnerships or workforce equity efforts?
Yeah, so listen, I echo the sentiments of both you amazing women. This has been an incredibly refreshing conversation. Don't get to have them very often because usually we're in the fixer mode, right? Where we're just trying to get people to understand that we need to do something immediately and not really talk about what that looks like, feels like, sounds like long term. But, for me, it's just about, what Nakeisha said, educating around why our civic responsibility matters. Like we need to understand how policies affect our everyday operating system and our lives, whether we are business owners or everyday constituents and residents, right? But more importantly, when we talk about how we can help advance opportunities for people that look like us, I think we've got to continue to build our collective capacity to stand up our own infrastructures, right? So that we can have that decision-making ability that directly impacts our people. It's great to rely on all of the things that are designed for the purpose in which they're designed to work, but we know all of that is finite, right? There's a cycle for everything. And so, we got to go back to our fundamental approach to how we support each other and to our earlier points in the conversation where we're talking about collective work and responsibility and what happened during the civil rights movement and who paid it all for us to be able to even have this conversation today. We've got to recognize that we have an obligation and responsibility as a people to further advance our work and our existence. And it's up to us because quite frankly and quite clearly, we are seeing that it is not a priority of allies and other folks right now. So just going back to the beginning of how this all works for us as a people. And to both of your points, and professionally, what I do every day is storytelling, right? And there is nobody that we should allow agency over our stories besides us, right? And so we've just got to keep doing it. We've got to commit to it, reaffirm it, and make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, this, like you said, this has been a really good conversation. It kind of makes me feel lighter, having these conversations with like-minded people who look like you.
Yeah.
So I thank you both again for sharing your expertise. Nakeisha, from your op-ed, and Jolie, just from your workforce development experience. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tianna, for this platform. Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed. And I'm looking forward to doing it again. So call me back up.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify. And follow us on social media at Skills Coalition for updates on all things skills training and workforce development.